The evening sun cast long shadows across Terminal B as Staff Sergeant Chen made her way through the bustling airport. Her combat boots, still carrying traces of desert sand, clicked against the polished floor. After 6 grueling months of deployment, all she wanted was to sink into a comfortable seat for the long flight home. Her shoulders ached under the weight of her military backpack, but she stood tall, her uniform pressed despite the long day of travel. The smell of coffee and cinnamon rolls wafted through the air as she approached the gate, mixing with the familiar airport sounds of rolling suitcases and muffled announcements. "Good evening," she said, managing a tired smile as she reached the counter. The gate agent, a middle-aged woman with reading glasses perched on her nose, looked up from her computer screen. "I was wondering if there might be any first-class upgrades available for military personnel?" Chen asked hopefully. She'd heard from fellow soldiers that airlines sometimes offered these upgrades as a gesture of appreciation. The gate agent's fingers danced across her keyboard, her expression changing from neutral to apologetic. "I'm so sorry," she said, adjusting her glasses. "We usually do offer upgrades when possible, but due to some technical limitations in our system today." She trailed off, clearly uncomfortable with delivering the news. Chen's heart sank, but years of military service had taught her grace under disappointment. "That's completely fine," she replied, forcing brightness into her voice. "I understand these things happen." As she turned away from the counter, she caught her reflection in the window. Dark circles rimmed her eyes, evidence of countless nights spent on duty. The weight of missing her family's birthdays, holidays, and everyday moments hung heavy on her shoulders. All she'd wanted was a bit of comfort for the final leg of her journey home. Other passengers nearby watched the exchange, some pretending to be absorbed in their phones while others openly stared. A young child tugged at his mother's sleeve, pointing at Chen's uniform and whispering questions about why she looked so tired. The overhead speakers crackled to life, announcing boarding would begin in 30 minutes. Chen found an empty seat near the window, watching planes take off into the darkening sky. She pulled out her phone, thinking about calling her mom, when an unexpected voice broke through the airport's ambient noise. "Excuse me," the voice said, getting closer. "I couldn't help but overhear." A well-dressed businessman approached, his leather briefcase gleaming under the fluorescent lights. His presence drew curious glances from nearby passengers who sensed something interesting was about to unfold. Little did anyone know that this moment would spark a chain of events that would touch thousands of lives and change airline policies forever. The exhausted soldier looked up, unaware that her day was about to take an extraordinary turn. After months of serving others, she was about to experience firsthand how a simple act of kindness could transform not just her journey home, but the journeys of countless service members to come. Behind her, the setting sun painted the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, as if nature itself was setting the stage for what would happen next. The regular buzz of airport life continued around them, but in this corner of Terminal B, something special was brewing. A reminder that sometimes the most remarkable stories begin with a simple no that leads to an unexpected yes. The businessman who approached Staff Sergeant Chen stood out from the usual airport crowd. His tailored suit suggested success, but there was something approachable in his warm smile and the way he carried himself. He wasn't just another corporate executive rushing between meetings. There was purpose in his steps as he made his way toward her. "I couldn't help but overhear what happened at the counter," he said, his voice carrying the kind of quiet confidence that came from years of making important decisions. He introduced himself as Mr. Thompson, though he quickly added, "Please, call me Robert." The creases around his eyes deepened when he smiled, telling stories of both laughter and long nights spent building his company from the ground up. Chen straightened in her seat, military training kicking in automatically. But Robert gestured for her to stay comfortable. "You've stood at attention enough for all of us," he said, pulling up a nearby seat. The overhead lights caught the silver in his hair as he settled in, briefcase resting against his leg. Around them, the airport continued its endless dance of arrivals and departures. A baby laughed somewhere in the terminal, the sound floating above the general murmur of travelers. The aroma of fresh-baked pretzels drifted by, making Chen realize she hadn't eaten since breakfast. "You know," Robert began, his tone conversational but carrying an undercurrent of emotion, "watching you at that counter brought back memories. He paused, reaching for his wallet. Inside, slightly worn at the edges, was a photograph of a young man in military dress blues. "My son," he explained, pride evident in his voice. "Third-generation service member." Chen leaned forward slightly, recognizing the unit insignia in the photo. The connection was immediate. The universal language of service members and their families needed no translation. "He's stationed overseas now," Robert continued, carefully returning the photo to his wallet. "Every time I see someone in uniform, I think of him. The sacrifices, the missed holidays, the proud moments we couldn't share in person." His voice trailed off, heavy with understanding. Other passengers nearby had stopped pretending not to listen. An elderly couple held hands tighter, their own memories clearly stirred. A teenager put down her phone, genuinely engaged in the scene unfolding before her. Robert reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his boarding pass, first class, window seat. "I've made my decision," he said firmly, standing up. His next words would set in motion a chain of events that would ripple far beyond this chance encounter in Terminal B. The intercom crackled again, announcing priority boarding would begin in 15 minutes. The usual shuffling of passengers beginning to gather their belongings created a gentle backdrop to this moment. But in their corner of the airport, time seemed to slow down. A group of schoolchildren on a field trip passed by, their excited chatter mixing with rolling suitcases and announcement chimes. One small boy stopped to stare at Chen's combat boots before being ushered along by his teacher. The normal flow of airport life continued around them, but something extraordinary was taking shape. Robert smoothed his tie, a gesture that seemed more habit than necessity. "Let's head back to that counter together," he said, picking up his briefcase. "I think we can make this right." His tone carried no room for argument, though it remained gentle. Chen began to protest, but Robert held up a hand. "Sometimes," he said, "accepting kindness is its own form of service." The wisdom in his words was simple but profound, earned through years of life experience. As they stood to walk back to the counter, neither of them could have predicted how their next few minutes would impact airline policies, social media, and most importantly, the lives of countless service members to come. The sunset outside had deepened to purple, and the airport's lights seemed to shine a bit brighter, as if nature and technology alike were bearing witness to this moment. Behind them, a young woman quickly typed on her phone, capturing the beginning of what would soon become a viral story of kindness and respect. But for now, it was just two people walking toward a ticket counter, about to remind everyone that sometimes the biggest changes start with the smallest gestures. The walk back to the counter felt longer than it should have. Each step echoed with purpose against the airport's polished floor. The gate agent looked up, surprise flickering across her face as she recognized the returning pair. Around them, the terminal hummed with its usual evening energy, but something different hung in the air. A sense that something special was about to unfold. "I'd like to exchange my first-class ticket," Robert announced, placing his boarding pass on the counter. His voice was firm but kind, the tone of someone used to making things happen. "This soldier deserves that seat more than I do." The gate agent's fingers froze over her keyboard. "Sir, she began, glancing between her computer screen and the pair standing before her. "There are certain protocols we need to follow. The system doesn't really." Staff Sergeant Chen stepped forward, her voice soft but clear. "Please, sir, this isn't necessary. I'm perfectly fine with my assigned seat." The overhead lights caught the medals on her uniform, small reminders of sacrifices already made. But Robert wasn't backing down. He leaned slightly on the counter, his briefcase resting against his leg. "Let me tell you what's necessary," he said, not unkindly. "What's necessary is showing proper respect for the people who serve our country. Now, I'm sure there's a way to make this happen." More passengers had gathered nearby, pretending to check their phones while watching the scene unfold. A young mother explained in whispers to her curious child what was happening. The smell of coffee from a nearby cafe drifted through the air, mixing with the anticipation building around the counter. The gate agent adjusted her glasses, determination replacing uncertainty on her face. "Let me call my supervisor," she said, reaching for her phone. "There might be a way." Her voice trailed off as she dialed, eyes already scanning through different screens on her computer. While they waited, Chen shifted uncomfortably. "You really don't have to do this," she said to Robert. I've gotten used to long flights in cramped seats. She attempted a small laugh, but it couldn't hide the exhaustion in her eyes. Robert turned to her, his expression serious. You know what my father used to tell me? He asked, his voice carrying the weight of memory. He'd say that gratitude isn't just about saying thank you, it's about showing it when you have the chance. He paused, letting the words sink in. This is my chance. The supervisor arrived, her heels clicking briskly across the floor. She listened to the situation, fingers flying across a tablet as she spoke quietly with the gate agent. Around them, the terminal continued its symphony of announcements, rolling suitcases, and distant conversations. We can make this work, the supervisor finally announced, a smile breaking through her professional demeanor. We'll need to process it as a special accommodation, but she trailed off, already typing commands into the system. A small crowd had gathered by now, drawn by the energy of the moment. An elderly veteran in a Korean war cap stood quietly at the edge of the group, wiping his eyes discreetly. A businessman in line behind them closed his laptop, suddenly more interested in this unfolding story than his quarterly reports. As the gate agents worked their magic with the computer system, Robert shared a quiet moment with Chen. My son would never forgive me if I didn't do this, he said, pulling out his phone to show her more family photos. He's missed 3 Christmases now, serving overseas. The printing of new boarding passes broke through their conversation, the official sound of kindness being documented. The supervisor handed them over with a genuine smile, her earlier concerns about protocols forgotten in the face of something more important than rules. Chen held her new first-class ticket, emotions playing across her face. After months of desert dust and danger, after missing her family's birthdays and holidays, after carrying the weight of responsibility on her shoulders, this simple act of kindness hit harder than she expected. The terminal's usual sounds seemed to fade into the background as she found her voice. Thank you, she said simply, the words carrying more weight than usual. This means more than you know. The first boarding call echoed through the terminal, but nobody in the gathered crowd moved. They were all witnesses to something rare and beautiful, a moment when the best of humanity shined through the ordinary routines of a busy airport. As they prepared to head toward their separate gates, neither Chen nor Robert realized that their exchange had already begun spreading through social media. Someone had captured the entire interaction on video, and with a few taps on a phone screen, their story was about to reach far beyond Terminal B, touching hearts and inspiring changes they couldn't yet imagine. With their new boarding passes in hand, Robert and Staff Sergeant Chen found themselves with a few minutes before boarding would begin. They settled into the waiting area, where the evening light streaming through the terminal's tall windows cast long, warm shadows across the floor. Let me show you something, Robert said, pulling out his phone. His fingers, slightly weathered from years of hard work, swiped through photos until he found what he was looking for. This was my son's first deployment. The image showed a young man standing proud in his uniform, desert mountains rising behind him. Chen leaned in to look, recognizing the backdrop. That's where I just came from, she said softly. The coincidence made the terminal feel suddenly smaller, the world more connected. Around them, other passengers pretended not to listen, but their turned heads and quiet phones revealed their interest. He's been serving for 6 years now, Robert continued, his voice carrying the unique mix of pride and worry that only military parents understand. But it's the random acts of kindness from strangers that keep him going. Like the family that invited him to Thanksgiving when he couldn't make it home, or the elderly couple who paid for his coffee every morning for a week. A young boy nearby tugged at his mother's sleeve, asking in that loud whisper children use, "Mom, is that lady a hero?" The mother smiled, nodding, as Chen pretended not to hear, though a faint blush colored her cheeks. You know what the hardest part is? Robert asked, tucking his phone away. It's not knowing if people understand what our service members go through. He paused, watching a plane take off through the window. The missed birthdays, the empty chairs at holiday dinners, the worry that keeps us up at night. The terminal's usual sounds, rolling suitcases, muffled announcements, quiet conversations, created a gentle backdrop to their conversation. A few rows away, a teenager who had been recording the earlier exchange was already uploading the video, her fingers moving quickly across her screen. The thing is, Robert continued, his voice thick with emotion, when my son calls home, he never complains. He talks about the good things, the bonds with his fellow soldiers, the communities they help, the people who show them kindness. That's what keeps him going. Chen nodded, understanding perfectly. We remember every kindness, she said. Every letter from a stranger, every care package, every simple thank you for your service. It matters more than people know. A group of business people walked past, their hurried pace slowing as they caught pieces of the conversation. One of them pulled out his phone, already typing what looked like a message to share this moment with others. My son told me about a time when his unit was stranded at an airport during a snowstorm, Robert shared, his eyes distant with memory. A local family opened their home to them, cooked them dinner, gave them warm beds for the night. He still keeps in touch with them. The story sparked something in Chen. That reminds me of my first deployment, she began, then stopped as her voice caught slightly. Sorry, it's just, sometimes it's the simple things that hit you the hardest, you know? Robert nodded, understanding written across his face. That's exactly why I wanted to do this today, he said, gesturing to their new boarding passes. Sometimes a simple gesture can mean everything. The pre-boarding announcement crackled through the speakers, but no one in their corner of the terminal moved. They were all caught in this moment, witnesses to something genuine and pure in a world that often felt too busy for such connections. A flight attendant walking by stopped to listen, her own eyes growing misty as she heard their exchange. She'd seen countless passengers come and go, but this was different. This was real. You've probably heard this 1,000 times, Robert said, standing as their boarding time approached, but thank you. Thank you for your service, for the sacrifices, for everything you and your fellow service members do. Chen stood too, adjusting her uniform out of habit. And thank you, she replied, for reminding me that there are still people who understand. Neither of them knew it yet, but the conversation had already begun spreading beyond the terminal walls. The teenager's video was gaining traction online, and messages were being shared across social media platforms. Their simple exchange was about to spark something bigger than either of them could imagine. As they prepared to board their flight, the setting sun painted the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, as if nature itself was celebrating this moment of human connection. In an age of quick judgments and hurried goodbyes, they had created a space for something real and lasting. The video started simple enough, just another phone recording in an airport terminal. But there was something different about this one, something real. The teenage girl who captured the moment had simply titled it, "This is what respect looks like," before sharing it with her few hundred followers. Within the first hour, as Staff Sergeant Chen and Robert were still in the air, the video had already been shared thousands of times. People weren't just clicking and moving on, they were stopping, watching, and feeling something stir in their hearts. "This made me cry," read one comment. "My brother's been deployed for 8 months. This hits home." The comment section filled with similar stories, each one adding a new thread to the tapestry of shared experiences. A popular news site picked up the story first. Their headline was simple: "Business executive gives up first-class seat to soldier, but that's just the beginning." The article included screenshots from the video, capturing the exact moment Robert handed over his boarding pass, the genuine surprise on Chen's face, and the gathering crowd of witnesses. By midnight, the hashtag first-class respect was trending. Veterans started sharing their own stories of kindness received during travel. A retired pilot wrote about secretly upgrading service members whenever he could. A flight attendant posted about keeping extra snacks for uniformed personnel on her flights. Remember when airports used to have special lounges for service members? One viral tweet read, "Maybe it's time to bring those back." The suggestion caught fire, with thousands of people tagging airlines and airports, asking why this wasn't standard practice anymore. The next morning, as the sun rose over different time zones, the story took on new life. International news outlets picked it up, translating the story for audiences worldwide. A morning show host in Australia wiped away tears while reading it on air. A British radio station dedicated an hour to calling in similar stories of everyday heroes. But it wasn't just about watching and sharing anymore. People started acting. A coffee shop chain announced they would offer free drinks to service members. A hotel group pledged priority upgrades for military personnel. Small businesses near military bases posted signs offering special discounts. My daughter saw the video and asked how she could help soldiers, one mother posted. We're now putting together care packages as a family project. The post included a photo of her children carefully wrapping cookies and writing thank you notes. Military family support groups saw their follower counts explode. Organizations supporting veterans received unexpected donations. People weren't just moved by the story, they were inspired to create change. A group of college students started a hashtag Show Your Respect challenge, encouraging people to film themselves doing something kind for service members or veterans. The responses ranged from simple gestures like buying coffee for a uniformed soldier to more elaborate acts like organizing community appreciation events. This isn't about viral videos, wrote one veteran in a widely shared post. It's about remembering that behind every uniform is a person who's sacrificing for others. Sometimes a simple thank you isn't enough. We need to show our gratitude through actions. The airline industry couldn't ignore the movement. Competitors of the original airline began announcing their own military upgrade policies. Airport lounges started reviewing their military access protocols. Travel websites added special military booking options. By afternoon, news crews had tracked down the airport where it all began. The gate agent who helped process the ticket exchange found herself being interviewed. "I've worked here for 15 years, she told the reporter, dabbing at her eyes. "But I've never seen anything quite like this." Social media analysts called it a perfect storm of authenticity and timing. In a world often divided by differences, this story reminded people of their shared humanity. It wasn't staged, wasn't trying to sell anything, it was just one person choosing to be kind to another. As the story continued to spread, people began asking about Chen and Robert. But those who had witnessed the exchange in person defended their privacy. "This isn't about making celebrities," one witness posted. "It's about inspiring all of us to do better." The original video hit 10 million views by sunset. But more importantly, it had sparked thousands of real-world actions, from policy changes to personal commitments. In airport terminals across the country, people began looking at uniformed service members differently, wondering how they could show their appreciation. And somewhere in the digital chaos of viral fame, the true message remained clear. Sometimes the smallest gestures of respect can create the biggest waves of change. The story wasn't ending. It was just beginning to show people how much impact their choices could have. The airline's corporate headquarters buzzed with unusual energy for an early morning. The CEO had called an emergency meeting after watching the viral video on his phone during breakfast. Now, sitting in the glass-walled conference room on the top floor, he looked at his leadership team with determination. "We need to do better," he said, placing his coffee cup down firmly. "This isn't just about one flight or one soldier. This is about who we are as a company." The morning sun streamed through the windows, highlighting the concerned faces around the table. In the corner, a young member of the social media team was providing live updates. "The video's been viewed over 15 million times now," she reported, scrolling through her tablet. Comments are overwhelmingly asking why we didn't have better policies in place. The head of customer experience leaned forward, her reading glasses catching the light. "We've always supported military personnel," she began, but the CEO raised his hand. "Supporting isn't enough anymore," he said. "We need to lead." He stood up and walked to the window, watching planes take off in the distance. "I want a complete overhaul of our military support programs, not just upgrades, everything." The room erupted with ideas. The marketing director suggested priority boarding for all service members. The operations manager proposed dedicated check-in counters. Someone mentioned converting unused airport office space into military rest areas. Down in the customer service department, phones were ringing nonstop. People weren't calling to complain. They were calling to offer to donate their frequent flyer miles to service members. The story had touched something deep in people's hearts, awakening a desire to help. By midday, the airline's PR team had drafted a statement, but the CEO rejected the first version. "This isn't about damage control," he insisted. "This is about doing what's right." He picked up a pen and began writing himself, speaking from the heart rather than corporate playbooks. The final statement was simple but powerful. "Yesterday, we witnessed an incredible act of kindness in one of our terminals. Today, we're announcing the most comprehensive military support program in aviation history. We're calling it Wings of Gratitude, and here's what it means. The announcement detailed free upgrades when seats were available, priority boarding for all service members, complimentary access to airport lounges, and special assistance for military families during deployments. But it didn't stop there. "We're also establishing a foundation," the statement continued, "to support military families during travel emergencies. No service member should ever worry about getting home when they're needed most." Other airlines scrambled to respond. Within hours, competitors began announcing their own military support programs. What started as one passenger's generous gesture was transforming into industry-wide change. The business world took notice. Roberts' company announced a new hiring initiative focused on veterans. Other corporations began reviewing their military support policies. The ripple effect spread beyond travel into retail, hospitality, and entertainment sectors. In the airline's call center, a supervisor gathered her team for their afternoon briefing. "Remember," she told them, "when service members call about these new policies, they're not just customers. They're the reason we can do what we do every day." Social media lit up with positive responses. Veterans shared stories of past struggles with military travel. Active duty personnel expressed gratitude. Civilians pledged to support airlines that supported troops. The hashtag Wings of Gratitude started trending alongside hashtag First Class Respect. Military family support organizations reached out to the airline, offering to help implement the new programs. Airport managers across the country began designating special areas for service members. Ground crews started planning special welcomes for flights carrying returning troops. The CEO spent the afternoon recording a video message for employees. "This isn't about publicity," he emphasized. "This is about building a legacy of respect and gratitude. Every time you see a uniform at our terminals, remember, we have the privilege of serving those who serve us all." In the corporate cafeteria, employees shared their own connections to the military: brothers, sisters, parents, friends who served. The story had opened up conversations that needed to happen, revealing how many lives were touched by military service. By evening, as the workday wound down, the company had received thousands of supportive messages. But one stood out: a handwritten note from a veteran flight attendant. "Today, you didn't just change a policy. You changed how we show our gratitude. Thank you for reminding us what really matters." The sun set on a day of transformation, not just for one airline, but for an entire industry. What began as a simple act of kindness in a busy terminal had grown into something much bigger: a movement to honor service members in ways both big and small. 3 months had passed since that evening in Terminal B, and the world had changed in small but significant ways. The grand ballroom of the Veterans Support Foundation was filled with people gathered for their annual Military Appreciation Gala. Soft piano music floated through the air as attendees in formal wear mingled, sharing stories and celebrating service. Staff Sergeant Chen stood near the entrance, now in her dress uniform adorned with medals. She looked different from that tired soldier in the airport, rested, but more importantly, carrying herself with renewed pride. The past months had shown her that her service meant more to people than she'd ever realized. Across the room, Robert adjusted his bow tie, pausing to shake hands with various guests. His company's veteran hiring initiative had already brought on 50 former service members, each bringing unique skills and perspectives to the workplace. But tonight wasn't about business, it was about something much more personal. "Ladies and gentlemen," the event host announced, tapping a glass for attention. 3 months ago, a simple act of kindness in an airport terminal sparked a movement. Tonight, we're here to celebrate not just that moment, but everything that's grown from it. The lights dimmed slightly as a video screen lowered. The familiar airport scene played out, but this time interspersed with clips of what followed. Airlines implementing new military support programs, businesses launching veteran initiatives, communities creating welcome home celebrations for returning troops. A young girl in the audience tapped at her mother's sleeve. "That's the video we watched in school," she whispered. Her class had used the story as part of a lesson about citizenship and gratitude, one of many schools that had incorporated it into their curriculum. The host continued, "In just 3 months, we've seen over 500 companies revise their military support policies. Airports across the country have opened dedicated service member lounges. But more importantly, we've witnessed countless individual acts of kindness inspired by this story. Pictures flashed across the screen. A coffee shop owner serving free drinks to uniformed personnel, children writing thank you letters to troops, community groups organizing military family support events. Each image represented dozens more just like it, rippling out across the country. Robert's son had managed to get leave to attend the event. He stood proud in his uniform, watching as his father was called to the stage. The crowd's applause was warm, genuine, reflecting appreciation not just for one act of kindness, but for the change it inspired. "I never expected any of this," Robert began, his voice carrying emotion. "I simply saw someone who deserved recognition and respect. But what happened next?" He paused, gathering his thoughts. "What happened next showed me that people were just waiting for permission to show they cared." In the audience, the gate agent from that evening wiped away tears. Her airline had promoted her to lead their new military support program, turning her years of experience into something even more meaningful. She'd learned that sometimes the biggest changes start with saying yes to doing the right thing. Staff Sergeant Chen took the stage next, the lights catching the brass on her uniform. "People keep calling us heroes," she said, looking out at the crowd. "But the real heroes are in this room, the families who wait, the communities who support, the everyday citizens who take a moment to show they care." The foundation they'd established together had already helped hundreds of military families with emergency travel needs. But beyond the practical support, it had created something less tangible but equally important: a renewed sense of connection between civilian and military communities. A group of corporate executives in the audience listened intently, tablets and phones forgotten. They'd come expecting another charity gala, but found themselves part of something more authentic. Many were already making mental notes, thinking of ways their own companies could do more. "This isn't the end of the story," Robert said as the evening drew to a close. "It's just the beginning." Every day, in airports and offices and communities across the country, people are choosing to show their gratitude in new ways. And each of those moments creates its own ripple effect. Staff Sergeant Chen added her own closing thoughts. "3 months ago, I was just trying to get home. Now I'm part of something bigger, we all are. And that's the real power of kindness. It shows us what's possible when we stop waiting for others to act and decide to make a difference ourselves." As the evening wound down, guests lingered, sharing their own stories of impact and inspiration. The piano player had switched to patriotic songs, playing softly as conversations continued. Outside, the night sky was clear and star-filled, a reminder of the vastness of possibility. What had started as a simple exchange of airline tickets had become something far more significant, a reminder that in a world often divided by differences, acts of kindness could still bridge any gap, heal any wound, and inspire changes that no one could have predicted.